Welcome to my Napoleonic painting series. This time I'm going to be painting up the horse artillery for the Russian Napoleonic army. I'm going to be painting up 4 batteries of the 6-pounder horse artillery and also 4 stands of limbers. I start out with a very simple zenithal highlight, which is basically a black primer applied to all the models all the way around. Just make sure you get full coverage from all directions. I next apply white primer in a 45-degree angle all the way around the models to simulate a upper light source that's diffused all the way around. Once done, the models should look like they have a nice bright top with some shadowing and blackness at the bottom. The first thing I'm going to tackle are the horses. I'm going to be only using these 4 speed paints. Starting with darkwood speed paint, I apply it onto 2, maybe 3 horses to give them that dark brown color. Regardless of which horse you're working on, you'll want to leave the mane and the tail white because you'll be able to create different color variations in those areas as we go along. I'll show you in a little bit. I also generally try to avoid all the brittles and any of the saddles or saddle cloths. I want to leave those white. I next switch to hardened leather speed paint, and I now paint 2 or 3, maybe even 4 horses as light brown. I do it in the same way as I did dark wood. I avoid any of the areas that I'm going to be painting different colors. I next switch to gray floor gray speed paint, and I paint a few horses dark gray. Next I use grim black and I paint a few horses black. Now when you paint black horses, paint over the brittles. The brittles are going to be black anyway, so just paint them black. Now keep a few horses white just by not painting them. They're already prime white. Next I'm going to grab some matte white acrylic paint and I'm going to touch up any of the manes or tails that I had overshot with any of the speed paints. This allows me to place different colors down later. Now for the manes and tails, I just use leftover dark oak, hardened leather, gray floor gray, or grim black, and I just vary it from horse to horse. Of course, you'll want the tail and the mane to have the same color, but you can use brown on black horses, black on white horses, gray on dark brown horses, and so on. And just by varying them, just with these 4 simple colors, you can make a variety of horses without overstressing and keeping your palette from being overly complicated. Now moving on to the Russian troops. I'm going to be using Crusader Skin speed paint and then applying them onto all the faces and the exposed hands on all the human models. Now moving on to the guns, I'm going to be using Talos Bronze Metallic Speed Paint. This is a great line from Army Painter and it applies metallics on very easily. The guns look great with this color, as you can see here. Onward to the trousers of these artillerymen, I'm going to be using Runic Gray Speed Paint. This is a bluish hue of gray and it works really well on these models. Unlike the rest of the Russian army that wore white trousers, these mounted artillerymen used to wear gray, and this works really well on them. Now switch to a darker gray color with more of a black tinge. This is gray floor gray, and this works really well on all the bedrolls. You will find a majority of these bedrolls on these Perry Miniatures models, mainly on the horses. And also some of the artillerymen have them as bedrolls that go over their shoulders like this right here. I also use this gray floor gray on any of the sponges like I'm showing here. This makes a good dingy blackish color which suits the sponge. And then for all the horse artillery, they usually wear a fairly pointed helmet with this large plume on the top. I want to paint those gray floor gray as well. I next use Broadsword Silver Metallic Speed Paint. This is a great dark silver, and this goes on all the center hubs of any of the gun carriages and also along the periphery of any of the wheels. And then after that, I also applied this silver onto the little parts that are metallic on the gun carriages. I also applied the silver onto the chains of the limber as I'm showing here, and then on any of the rungs that are silver. Now also on the hub and the periphery of the wheel on the limbers, just like it did the gun carriages. And there are also a few suspension and spring parts on the rear of the limbers. Paint those silver also. Now onward to one of the major colors on these models. I'm going to be using Absolution Green for the signature dark green of the Russian army. With a fairly broad brush, I apply it onto all the areas of the gun carriers as I'm showing here, along the spokes of the wheels and down onto the carriage itself. Now you may be wondering why I didn't apply this with an airbrush or something similar. I took a slightly different approach in this video because I really wanted to maintain the white priming that I had done earlier. Now if I had shot this paint out of an airbrush, it would overspray everywhere, and then just the work to go back and correct that overspray might have taken up a lot more time. So I actually decided to go the brushing route and apply this color with a brush instead. The good news is Army Painter speed paints are very runny and low viscosity, so they're able to get into the little nooks and crannies very easily. Next, with a smaller brush, I apply it onto all the uniforms or the upper tunics of all the artillerymen. The one thing that I'm very careful about is not getting this color onto any of the straps. The cross straps, I want to maintain them as pristine white. So I'm very careful when I'm close to the cross straps. If you do overpaint a little bit, don't worry about it. There is a correction step that I will be showing you later. You will also notice that I'm avoiding the cuffs and collars in the same way as well. Moving on to the limbers, almost the entire limber is going to be painted this dark green Absolution Green speed paint. Now, the only areas that I'm not going to paint green are the areas that I had painted silver earlier. Either in that, just have at it and use a broad brush and try to get into all the areas of the limber. I next paint the tunics of the riders in the same way that I painted the other artillerymen, just making sure to avoid all the cross straps, any of the collars, and any of the cuffs on these models. Next, I use Golden Armor Metallic Speed Paint, and this is going to go on the little adornment on the helmets of the artillerymen. Next, I put this Golden Armor Speed Paint onto all the swords of the artillerymen as I'm showing you right here. The ones that are standing next to the guns, and on the limbers, the riders have sabers. Those hilts also get the gold treatment. I next switch to Hardened Leather Speed Paint, and this is going to go on anything that is wood or leather. For instance, this ramrod here is going to get this light brown. It makes it look nice and rich like wood. And then I also applied this light brown hardened leather speed paint onto any of the scabbards. It makes it stand out from the rest of the uniform that all these artillerymen are wearing. Next, I use Grim Black Speed Paint, which is another major color for the Russian army, and I'm going to put this on all the hats and helmets. So over here you can see I'm applying it onto the artillerymen's pointy hats. They only go on the areas that don't have gold or the gray flirt gray I had applied earlier. This Grim Black Speed Paint also goes onto any of the cartridge pouches or carriers. As you can see, usually they are on the back of the models. Some also have them on the fronts, so you just have to look through each model and then apply the black accordingly. This black also goes on all the shoes. On the limber riders, they wear Kaiwer caps instead of the tall pointy hats. Be very careful to not apply them onto the braids. You'll want to leave the braids and the caps white. You will also have to apply this Grim Black Speed Paint onto all the brittles on the horses. Now this can be fairly tedious, but the good news is, with the low viscosity of speed paints and with a careful brush, you want to use a slightly pointed brush so you can control the paint a little bit better, but using this speed paint you can quickly apply this black onto all the brittles. Now, pro tip, for any of the horses that were painted black, you should have already painted those with black brittles. So for those horses you can actually skip this step, which is kind of nice. And as you're painting, make sure you paint the stirrups and the boots of the riders black. If they carry any whips, paint those black as well. Next, I use leather brown acrylic paint. The first area I'm going to paint are the hooves of the horses. And I do this on any of the horses regardless of their starting color. Even if they are a lighter brown, this slightly different shade and consistency of brown will make the hooves look more convincing. I also use this leather brown acrylic paint on all the chin straps on the helmets and hats. Now, these Perry Miniatures models do not show chin scales, they actually show straps. And in this case, they tend to be leather, so brown is pretty suiting in this area and also provides a nice contrast. I next use pure red acrylic paint, and I'm going to put these on all the collars and cuffs of all the artillerymen. Russian artillery units tended to have red markings. This red also goes on the shoulder epaulettes. On the riders of the limbers, I apply this not only to the shoulder epaulettes, the cuffs, and the collars, but I also put them on the pompons on all the Kaiwer caps. Next, I work on the hair of the models, and for this I'm basically using the hardened leather, grim black, and dark wood leftover paint that I had used on the horses earlier. There should be some left on your wet palette, so just grab it a little bit and then just apply it onto the mustache or onto the backs of their heads, and this works really well for the hair. Now for a minor detail, I'm going to work on the flame of the Budafu, which is the little match that this guy is carrying. I apply some lava orange speed paint followed by some zealot yellow speed paint in layers in order to create the fiery effect. Next, I'm going to do some touch up with some matte white and some gunmetal. Starting with gunmetal, I go over all these little features that are usually silver, and what's nice about this acrylic metallic paint is that it goes right on top of all the earlier work that you worked on, and it's very easy for touch-up work and adding detail. I next use the matte white acrylic paint to touch up any of the cross straps and belts on these models. The white cross straps and belts tend to really stand out on these models and be focal points on them, so it's important that they look nice and crisp. I repeat this silver and white touch-up process on the limbers as well, over here on these little features on the spokes of the wheel, and then also on the center ammunition crate. There are several features that are silver, and I'll show them right here. All the hinges and all the brackets in between the joints and so on, you want to paint all of those silver. It gives it a point of interest and kind of brings that whole crate to life. I also use the silver on these little rings on the brittles. It helps break up the continuous black of the brittles a little bit. And then I switch to white, and besides the cross straps, I also look over the braiding that are on all the Kaiwer caps. I like to keep those nice and shiny white as well. Now to work on the eyes, I use a very simple treatment of matte white, watered down a little bit, and then with a very fine detailing brush, I apply them into the sockets of all the eyes of the troopers. For the pupils of their eyes, I use a pointy tip of a toothpick like this, and then I use matte black acrylic paint. I dip some matte black paint and then I paint both of the pupils on the eyes. Usually I try to focus one eye looking in one direction, and whichever that direction is looking at, I focus the other eye to look in the same direction. For the horses, it's a very similar process. I apply white onto all the eye sockets, but then the eyes of the horses are a little bit larger, so their pupils, I just continue using black paint and a small detailing brush and apply fairly large pupils to these eyes. Onward to basing, I keep things fairly simple. I use a green flocking material like this from Army Painter. This is called Battlefield Grass. And then I use Elmer's glue or white glue, apply it onto a palette or a plate or something. And then after that, using a very old brush, I go ahead and spread it all along the top of the bases. After all the white glue is applied, I just go ahead and hand apply the flocking like this. I do it in a big plastic container so any overspill can be caught in that container and then reclaimed later. Moving on to the limbers, I basically repeat the process, but these bases are a lot larger, so it requires a lot more white glue, but apply it carefully all over the top of the base, and then after that, just go ahead and spread the flocking over it like I did earlier. Since these bases are pretty big and barren, you can also add tufts like this, and what you want to do here is just use super glue, and then with a toothpick, a screwdriver or something similar, just kind of scrape away areas you want to apply the tuft. And then after that, on those bare areas, you can apply some super glue to it, and then slowly transfer the tufts onto each one of these areas. These allows the tufts to have a permanent bond onto these areas of the bases, and it prevents them from falling off while you're playing them on the tabletop. After this step, you're basically done. Next, you'll just want to protect all your hard work with 2 layers of matte varnish like this, which will prevent the paint from chipping and flaking off. Here are some pictures of the completed Russian horse artillery, their limbers as well as their cannons, and I was able to do 4 sets of each fairly quickly. I hope you enjoyed this video, and please follow along for future ones. Happy hobbying, and I will see you really soon.